Thank you, Andrea. We have 15 minutes to go, actually 12 or 13, and it's time for the panelists now. I leave the floor to Federico to introduce, the first two panelists of the session.
So basically, I think it's a very nice opportunity, and it's, we have here available two senior persons from clubs. We have here available two hull underwriters, and during these last months on these Iranian sanctions, I've been taking notes of the most common questions which we are receiving in here, and I think it would be a good opportunity to recap some of the more frequently asked questions and see whether we can provide, to a certain level of certainty, answers to these questions. There are 4 or 5 issues which are coming up every now and again, and what I was thinking is just to name them quickly, 4 or 5 of the points which I think may be of interest to everybody, and then I will leave you for free, whoever wants to respond to any of these questions, Stephen, Alistair, and Angelo, or Andrea. Basically, the questions are, we all know that there is not going to be cover in the moment in which an owner is trading a ship to Iran and is going to be caught in sanctioned trade. One of the questions is, the cover issue will only be affecting that single ship, or it can affect the whole entry in the moment in which we will be talking of a fleet entry. The second one is, to what extent clubs or underwriters, if asked in anticipation of a call in Iran, sort of a clearance by a client, would be in a position to say whether they are going to be involved in sanctioned trade, and therefore is there going to be a problem with cover or not. A third problem is what happens in the moment in which your charterer orders you to go to Iran. And at that stage, for example, this is specific for the clubs, i.e. from the defense point of view, what would be the reaction of the club in terms of defending an owner or a charterer, because we may have also a chartered entry in case there is an issue of this kind. A third one is what would be the position, and again, this is for, I think, for the clubs to answer, an owner who may have been already chartered to an Iranian entity, a sanctioned Iranian entity, prior to the sanctions being effective. Then clearly there is something which is important, which is owners can trade Iran even with non-sanctioned cargoes or non-sanctioned entities, trading with non-sanctioned entities. Problem is, despite it would not technically be a sanctioned trading, if something happens whilst the vessel is there in Iran, and there is, for example, a need of putting up a guarantee in the moment in which the club had to accept that in this case a guarantee can be provided, would you expect to have practical problems in being able to provide, say, the usual assistance which the clubs are rendering in these cases? Then I would leave you for free to decide who wants to answer these questions, and that would exhaust the point on Iranian sanctions, unless, of course, then the audience will have others.
Let me start with your first question. And I know that you said beforehand, I don't want any answers which are maybe or possibly. I want a yes or a no. So the first answer is possibly. And well, the question was, would it affect that ship only, or would it affect the whole fleet? And the answer is, we don't know. In our case, we have changed our rules to the minimum extent we could, so that we only stopped cover for that ship and not for the fleet, hoping that that will be enough. Now, whether it is or not, who knows? I think it may depend upon the structure of the ship-owning company, so there may be a different answer from case to case. But so far, we're hoping that we can deal with this on a ship-by-ship basis rather than a whole company.
The second question, I think, was effectively, could the club make a commitment in advance if asked about cover? And I think one can make two general points there. I don't think we believe that the authorities who are imposing these sanctions intend to trap people who are innocent. And it's quite noteworthy that in CISADA, the liability of insurers, if they were held to be insuring prohibited or sanctioned parties, depends upon knowledge. So certainly the advice we do give our members is that they need to make pretty comprehensive inquiries of the shippers or the sub-charterers, indeed of the consignees, in order to avoid as far as they can any infringement. It is very difficult when you're talking about materials that are potentially dual purpose, because dual purpose is a phrase or an idea, I should say, that's found both in the UN Security Council resolution and under CISADA. As far as the club is concerned, our obligation is to ensure that we don't jeopardize all of our members. And so we must keep the club sanction-free as well. And that too involves whatever processes we may have to ensure that we don't unwittingly become sanctions targets ourselves. But it's a long procedure, and if there's one key word, I do believe it's transparency. I do believe that the right approach, and the one we've adopted always, is to consult with the relevant authorities, whether that's Her Majesty's Treasury, the Foreign Office, OFAC in the United States. If you consult and are seen to be doing what they wish you to do, the chances of becoming sanctioned or worse are quite remote, we believe.
Sorry, the third one was, would you envisage, say, practical problems in the moment in which you had a ship which is not involved in sanctioned trading, having a problem in Iran?
I think that the answer has to be that there is no ship which is guaranteed not to cause a problem. Because even if you have a ship which is carrying non-sanctioned goods for non-sanctioned entities, and not in breach of the Charter Party, etc., you may perfectly well be allowed to go to Iran, and that might not be illegal, and your cover might stay in force. But if there is a problem when you get there, if you hit the dock, if somebody gets injured, if there is some sort of casualty, that may require a financial transaction to take place, and that might involve a bank being involved in the transaction, and that may well provide a difficulty, even if the whole trade was until that moment legal. We may find that from a practical perspective there are still problems. So I think if one is trying to provide advice, what do we do to stop having any problem at all? And it has to be try not to go to Iran, even with cargoes which on the face of it are not sanctionable.
The next one, I think, was what about an owner whose vessel is already chartered or was already chartered before the July or June sanctions to an Iranian entity? And at this point, I'd rather answer a question about the Hague rules, because it's quite a difficult question. Certainly, so far as insurers are concerned, we think it's possible, when the EU regulations come into force, that the insurance companies may be able to continue cover for or under policies that pre-existed. That doesn't exactly answer this question. The reality is, if something becomes illegal, which at the outset was not illegal, all of the clubs have rules that significantly qualify or exempt cover. And I fear that in this sort of situation, we'd end up supporting our members in a freight demurrage and defence legal costs way, rather than in a cover way.
Thank you.
We have the other two panelists. We have here Marco Poliseno, director of Polias, one of the prominent broking house in Naples, with a deep penetration with the local ship owners, and I think he wanted to put up a question to some of the speakers.
Yes, thanks, Maro. Listening to Mr. Ansaldo's presentation, come up a couple of very quick questions, quite, I think, easily can give some clarification. What is your opinion regarding all the concentration of insurance companies, as well as the reduction of Lloyd's underwriters playing on the other machinery fields, reflecting on the Italian and also on the global capacity on the insurance market?
I think that as far as the Italian market is concerned, to be fair, there is no specific impact coming from this big capacity you mentioned. In broader terms, yes, the international market is insurance market is affected by large capacity on direct basis and on insurance basis. But I don't think this can have a direct an impact on our rates too much, because this capacity, although is very big, is distributed in the non-marine fields, first of all, and there's a small portion only to the marine business. And secondly, these capitals come from overseas, from Bermuda, flooding into the London market and other markets, excluding Italy, and are capitals driven by short-term view in terms of profit. Are investment funds, corporate companies looking for immediate short-term profit. And if this does not come into their pocket, then they switch the capacity elsewhere in more profitable sectors. And this is exactly what we don't want to happen in our market, because we want a steady market. We want an insurance market that is able to meet with the owner's expectations in terms of good service, first of all, and a stable financial product that is the insurance premium.
Well, we thank Alberto Serino to be patient. I mean, to be the last panelist to intervene, and he's from Studio Legali Consociati, a well-known maritime firm. I leave you the word for a question or a statement or whatever you want to.
Okay, I have just a very short for Pietro Galizzi. I listened to your speech, in particular when you describe the apportionment of liability between the drilling contractor and the client. Of course, I don't want you to make any affirmation regarding the Deepwater Horizon, nothing that might affect the relationship between Saipem, BP, and so on. But my question is, do you see any risk of interference between the drilling contract and the client in dealing with the emergency, in the aftermath of any accident, particularly if you see any distinction between the MODU and FPSO?
Okay, thanks for the question. The idea is clearly that when the drilling unit is operating, it is under the control of the client. And so what we call the superintendent, the person in charge of the activities, is definitely responsible for everything which can happen. The problem can be that in some regulations, under some laws, there is not a clarity in the urgency, in the emergency situations. Strangely enough, the Italian law is very clear on this point, and it clearly states that if there is an emergency situation, the captain of the drilling unit has the last word. So we go back to the contractor's liability and contractor's action. With reference to FPSO, it is correctly a different situation, because we are talking about a very fixed device, very fixed, a former ship, but a very fixed now device. And so we are not talking any longer about a captain, and we simply talk about a device operating so strictly under the control of the client, under the supervision of the client. So the last word, I was saying, the famous last word, is up to the client, generally speaking.
There will still be plenty of questions, but we don't want to steal any more time to your coffee break. So I wish just to thank all the speakers, the panelists, and the audience for being here today. And I leave the word to Federico Dodato for the conclusion.
So clearly, as Mauro said, we could have carried on for another 2 hours discussing about these things, but we've been good so far. Francesco, you'll be happy. We've been able to recover 20 minutes despite your initial delay. And so thank you very much to everybody, to you for listening with patience, to you panelists, and to you speakers. Thank you very much.